All right. So thank you, Barb, for where are you? Okay, you're there. For introducing the conceptual framework that was developed in the manuscript, outlining what are the determinants of occupational health and safety, regulatory effectiveness within Canada's mobile labor force. Um, like you've showed, the full spectrum of mobility includes a broad range of different factual situations, each of which poses somewhat distinct challenges for regulatory effectiveness as this applies to injury prevention, compensation, and return to work. And for this presentation, I will focus on the determinants of regulatory effectiveness, of visibility and voice, and I will give some examples of how they intersect with mobility and may impact regulatory effectiveness. So we will see that talking about visibility and voice means different kinds of situation that will happen. Visibility and invisibility, we need to ask what is visible, what is invisible, but also to whom. And worker voice refers to the seminal work of Albert Hirschman, Exit Voice Loyalty, where the concept of voice refers to the efforts made here by the workers to change rather than escape from an objectionable state of affairs. And we'll see how visibility, worker voice intersect with mobility and regulatory effectiveness. So when we talk about visibility and invisibility, in the policy arena, the primary question relates to workers' visibility to different actors. So we have the state regulator, policymakers, but also employers and unions. And we will see some example of how some workers are highly visible to some actors, but also simultaneously invisible to other actors. And this may lead to the invisibility of some of the risks the mobile workers face when they are working, which may lead to further invisibility of some occupational injuries that may occur. And according to the research by Catherine Lippel and David Walters, the invisibility of mobile workers makes tracking of exposure to hazards particularly ineffective. The situation of international migrant workers is particularly telling on how mobility and visibility intersect. So we have workers who are actually highly visible to the federal immigration regulators, which tightly regulates their coming and going in and out of the country. They will often regulate where they work, for whom, and in some cases imposing closed permits, which ties them to just one employer. International migrant workers may also be visible within the community where they come to live, and some research has documented how they may be subject in some cases to social exclusion. They are also potentially subject to hyper-surveillance by the employers when they're at work, but also in the accommodations where they may be living. However, provincial regulatory bodies, including occupational health and safety and labor standard inspectorates, may have limited information with regard to these workers. And a striking example happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, during which provincial governments, regional health units provided employers with different guidelines about quarantining the workers, how to better protect the health and safety of agricultural migrant workers. These guidelines were not always adequately enforced, but who had jurisdiction to intervene wasn't always clear. In Quebec, for example, there was an investigation from a journalist who covered the living condition of 80 migrant workers who lived in tree houses and a former motel. And she discovered crowded spaces, inadequate access to showers, facilities that were covered in molds. And in her investigation, the CNSST, which is the regulatory body that is responsible for occupational health and safety and the labor standard in Quebec, so the CNSST confirmed that it had received 2 complaints about health and safety concern in these companies' home. However, since the housing was located outside the workplace, the CNSST stated it did not have jurisdiction to intervene, but it had apparently reported the matter to Service Canada, which is the federal regulator, and also to a regional health unit, a CIUS. So if you know what a CIUS does, I don't know what he would do in that case. So the CNSST left it for these agencies to intervene, but it wasn't clear how they would actually intervene and would come to inspect the premises. I don't have time to cover all the aspects of how visibility intersect with mobility. In the book, we dig down on how this determinant impacts regulatory effectiveness for other categories of mobile workers, like fly-in, fly-out, drive-in, drive-out workers, who may be invisible to policymakers since policymakers do not regulate their coming and going in and out of a province most of the time. And their temporary living condition, for example, may be overlooked. They may also be invisible to unions who have more difficulty accessing these workers than they would for workers who work in the same workplace and live in adjacent communities. A few studies also looked at isolated remote and transient work sites where the employer that is responsible for occupational health and safety may be absent from the actual work site and may not see the worker driving or being transported in an unsafe vehicle. And a few words about workers' compensation regimes. The mobility in itself is often invisible to a regulator. The law doesn't address most aspects of what mobility is and what it entails. So, for example, Lippel and Walters give a few examples. When it comes time, for example, to offer modified work to a worker who lives far from the job site, the worker's ability to do the modified work may not be problematic, but the worker may not be able to get to the workplace without due to his conditions, for example. So this mobility will not be taken into consideration. Another issue may arise in early return to work for fly-in, fly-out workers who are often hired on rotation. They work intensive period of work that allows them to return home for a longer period. But when light work is offered, the worker's health may not permit intensive work. And in these cases, it's unclear if a worker would have to choose between working less, staying in a remote location and not working that much and being away from his family, or see their benefits cut if he or she returns home. So as for worker voice, for different reasons, worker may fear speaking out due to risk of reprisal, due to the belief that it will not make a difference. And a few studies have reported on worker voice in the context of health and safety. And it's pretty clear from what we've gathered that mobility may impede worker voice and does make workers invisible. Whoops. So constraints on voice are particularly great among international migrant workers who are precariously employed, experience precarious immigration status linked to their mobility across international borders that places them at risk of blacklisting, deportation, and who also confront linguistic barriers. But other mobile workers may also face challenges when wanting to speak up about working conditions. The ambiguity of what is work-related, and Barb, you touched a bit on that. So what is or not work-related, perfect. Also weighs in the balance for a worker. For example, a worker may want to speak up about hazardous commuting condition or living condition, but if it's not clear whether it's work-related or not, the worker may fear speaking out because if the commute is not work-related, then it's not protected under occupational health and safety legislation. So the worker may be sanctioned for absenteeism or have an economic disadvantage if he or she refuses to take the road and undertake a long commute and miss a full rotation of work, for example. Refusing dangerous work can also be a challenge for mobile workers employed in mobile workplaces like truck drivers or in multiple workplaces like home care workers. These workers often work alone, so they have little or no guidance from their unions or their supervisors. In some cases, they even work in remote and in some cases, mobile or transient workplaces like tree planters, fishermen that are less accessible to labor inspectorate. who have the final say when a worker exercises right to refuse work. Inspectors in these cases may struggle to reach that remote location or see these dispersed or mobile work places, hindering their ability to respond to a worker's complaint or hazardous work refusal in person. And additionally, if there are safety representatives in the workplace, they may have difficulty accessing workers who are constantly on the move. So the role of trade union, we know that they play a crucial role in enforcing occupational health and safety regulation and in helping workers access workers' compensation regime. But when they are mobile, there are, well, two types of barriers. There are barriers to unionization and also to communication and engagement. When looking at communication and engagement, for example, fly-in, fly-out workers, we may need to take into consideration that they have exigencies of additional hours of travel that is required of them. Then they go on a long shift, extended rotation, and then there is a widespread dispersal of these workers who go back home. So this may not be conducive in participation to worker participation in activities that take place after work, for example. So these barriers may constrain worker consultation around work-related hazards. Also, so different kinds of mobile workers, whether fly-in, fly-out, drive-in, drive-out, international migrant workers, workers for whom mobility is an inherent part of their work, so may face difficulties participating in union activities. They may also be extremely difficult to organize using traditional organizing strategies. And this is true because they may be invisible to union organizers who can't get access to the remote work site or can't see them when they are constantly on the road, but also because in some cases they will less feel like part of a collective. In an On the Move policy report by Eric Tucker and Brendan Jowett, they studied the issues of mobility and collective bargaining and documented the challenges workers face. For them, the problem was the mismatch between their reality and the design and operation of Canada's collective bargaining laws. Lippel and Walters also asked, so what can union do? They didn't find one kind of systematic strategies that would be mobilized by unions. There were some example from a research from Walters where unions targeted workers when they were free, when they were being transported from, for example, the pickup site to the work site to transmit information about health and safety. Some also have highlighted the Swedish system for regional health and safety representative who represent the interest of workers in small firm. But this could actually, it's not used in Canada, but it could be a model worth exploring to meet occupational health and safety needs. Yes, in smart workplaces, but also in remote workplaces where workers are transient and scattered over a wide territory. So this could offer potential better protection for workers. And I just wanted to conclude on the fact that both prevention and compensation regimes are complaint-based. So workers must initiate a complaint, they must initiate a compensation claim, but clearly for some workers, this is not a realistic avenue. Mobility and its impact on visibility, on voice will disrupt this complaint-based system, which clearly highlights their pitfalls when mobility comes into play, making some workers invisible and voiceless. Thank you.